Hi, welcome everyone. My name is David Willey. I'm a consular officer at the US Consulate General in Mumbai. And I'm here to talk a little bit about studying the United States and also about the United States visa process. So I'm glad to see so many of you joining us today. And please type your comments in the side screen here, and we'll get to the questions probably towards the end, okay? All right, thank you. So right now, studying the United States is as popular as it's ever been. There are more than 1 million international students currently studying in the United States, and that includes all levels, bachelor's, master's, and PhD students, as well as non-degree students or certificate students. Indian students are actually the second largest foreign group studying in the United States. In fact, there are over 186,000 Indian students in the United States right now. As far as applying to universities, it's really going to be a drawn-out process, and for the vast majority of the first part of it, your main point of contact is going to be the individual school that you're interested in applying to. So starting about 18 months before you plan to start your program, you'll want to start researching what schools will you apply to, what programs are you interested in, what's the actual outcome that you'd like from the study abroad program. Between 16 and 10 months, that's when you're going to do your pre-applications, maybe starting on your tests, your GREs or your SATs, depending on the level. And 10 months out, that would be about now for fall of 2019. That's when your application process will go on. Usually applications will end up being due in about December or January of the year that you'll start your program. About 6 months out from your arrival at the university, that's when you'll get your admissions decisions. So that's generally in the April or May timeframe for fall admissions. And 3 months out, that's when you'll come up and start the US visa process. So actually applying for your visa, we think we've tried to make it as easy of a process as we can, but it's definitely going to help you if you're prepared in advance for the entire process. And you'll want to work with your school and also with your family and your financial support network in order to make sure that you're ready for the visa application process. So here we just see that the United States remains a very popular destination for study abroad. In fact, last year there was a 12% increase in Indian students studying in the United States. So the visa process starts when you get your admission to the university. That's when you'll be issued the I-20 from your university, which is a form that basically certifies that you've been admitted to the university and you're ready to start your studies. Once you have that form, you can go online to our websites, cac.state.gov or ustraveldocs.com, and complete your visa application. This is called the DS-160 form. Once you've completed your DS-160, you can pay your fee. In fact, there are many different ways to pay the fee, including at over 1,800 Axis or Citibank branches here in India. Now, once you've paid your fee, you're going to want to go and schedule 2 different appointments for your U.S. visa. The first is for your biometrics, your fingerprints, and your photograph to be taken at the Visa Application Center, or VAC. This should probably be about 50 days, no more than 50 days before your interview date. And you'll want to bring your passport and your DS-160 with you to this interview. The second appointment is going to be your actual visa appointment at the consulate with the consular officer. For this, you'll want to bring your passport and your I-20 form. And the final step 5, is to pay your SEVIS fee. Well, I talked a little bit about the interview before. Of course, that's going to be the last thing. So on the day that you come in for the interview, you're going to have a 2 to 3 minute interview with an American consular officer at the consulate or embassy. You're going to want to bring your passport and your I-120, and your main goal here is to demonstrate that you're prepared for your education process you have a financial plan in place to pay for your education, your entire education, whether it's a master's degree or another degree, and that you, in fact, plan to use your student visa appropriately. Once your visa is approved, the officer is going to keep your passport. You'll hang on to your I-20, and in about 3 to 5 days, you'll receive an email or an SMS telling you that your passport and your visa are ready to be picked up. Some important dates to remember. So the first time you're applying for your student visa, you should not apply more than 120 days before your program start date. In fact, anyone traveling for the first time on their student visa will not even be admitted to the United States more than 30 days before the report date. So if you have plans that involve traveling before that, you'll actually need to apply for a B1, B2 tourist visa as well as your F1 student visa. So we have some very great resources here for you for if you have any additional questions. One of the most important of these is our website for student for visas here in India. That's ustraveldocs.com/in, and we also have email and phone support for you. In addition, for those of you who are looking for information about studying in the United States or about schools or other processes, educationusa.state.gov is a fantastic resource. They're a U.S. government-funded agency that's there to help you figure out, advise you a little bit on schools and how to deal with the student education process. So I hope this brief presentation has been helpful, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions in the chat. Thank you. So we have our first question is from Vaibhav. He's asking, he says he's already got a master's degree. Will that make any problems for him in applying for a new degree? In fact, that's a visa myth. There's no requirement that you are starting on a degree for the first time. In fact, but you will still need to meet the same prerequisites. You will still need to demonstrate to the consular officer that you, in fact, plan to use your visa appropriately and that you have the finances and background that will allow you to succeed in your second master's program. I have another question that's very common, and I think it's good to answer here, which is, what kind of funds do you need to show during your visa interview? So it's important to remember that the visa interview process is not a document-driven process. It's an interview-driven process. And therefore, what we're looking for is a credible plan that you present orally to the consular officer, showing how you plan to fund your education, whether that's family support or loans or some other source of education, scholarships or anything like that. So at the actual interview, most likely the consular officer will not be asking you for documents. But if you feel that they will be helpful to you in going over your financial plan, you're welcome to bring them with you. Here's another question that we've seen before, and I think is also important. What if you have a B1, B2 in your passport already? Will that somehow negatively affect your application for a student visa? In fact, no. As long as you've used your B1, B2 appropriately in the past, it should be no issue for your student visa. In fact, what it shows is that you have already correctly used a U.S. visa in the past, which can have a positive effect on the consular officer's review of your application. So I see another question here, which is, I've been rejected twice for my student visa. May I apply again? Yes, you can apply as many times as you like. Of course, I don't know the reason why your application might have been rejected in the past, but if something has changed, usually consular officers are looking for something different between your first and your subsequent applications that would help further demonstrate your qualifications for an F1, a student visa. If something has changed or you feel that you have not been able to fully express your qualifications for the visa type, you're welcome to apply again, and you can apply again at any time. There's no waiting period that you have to get through before you can apply again. So another question here, when can I start attending when can I schedule a visa interview for spring 2019? So this was in the presentation earlier. Basically, you will want to study, I'll go back to this page. You should not apply more than 120 days before your report date. And once you're issued the visa, you will not be allowed to travel to the United States until there are less than 30 days left until your start date. And the start date for your university is going to be listed on your I-20 form. Okay, so someone says that they're looking for some clarification about B1, B2s, and F1 visas. So the F1 is the student visa. The B1, B2 is the tourist or business visa. So this involves this restriction on student visas, that you are not allowed to travel more than 30 days before your report date that's listed on your I-20. If for some reason you do need to travel more than 30 days before you're going to school, you will need to have a valid B1, B2 visa in your passport, since your F1 will not be valid until 30 days. So if that's the case for you, you will want to make sure that when you go for your interview, you ask for both an F1 and a B1, B2. So this is a great question. Someone has asked, what if we apply for a visa and then we get a better admissions offer from another university? Can we change the I-20 that we're using to enter the United States? Yes, you can. In fact, before your visa interview, just make sure when you go to the visa interview that you tell the officer that you want to go on a different I-20. You want to go to another program. And they should be able to change that, and they'll update your visa so that it reflects the program that you've actually accepted rather than the former program. So this is a great question. What are some common reasons an applicant might be rejected? Well, I want to be as straightforward as possible with this. And so let me put up this slide once again. You must demonstrate to the officer that you're prepared for the education that you're seeking, that you have a credible financial plan, and that you plan to use your visa appropriately. So each of those is important, and if you at the interview fail to demonstrate any of those, that might be a reason why your application has been rejected. So you want to make sure if you're studying for a degree in engineering that you have the background in engineering, or you're able to explain how you've acquired the background in engineering, if not through education. If to show that you have a credible financial plan, you may want to bring in loan documents, or you may want to bring in financial documents from the family that's supporting you in order to show at the visa interview. Okay, here's another common question. How long is an F1 visa valid? So currently F1 visas are issued for 5 years. Now that doesn't mean that you can stay in the United States for 5 years no matter what. What it means is that you are allowed to be a student as long as you maintain your student status. So for example, if you're in a bachelor's degree program and you do 1 year and you decide to go back to the United States and you're no longer go back to India and you're no longer a student, your visa will essentially not be valid anymore. You will not be able to enter the United States. Every time you enter the United States, you will need to show both the valid visa and a current I-20 form from a university. So in the case of the student who's taken a leave of absence, they would have to get an updated I-20 from their university in order to re-enter on their student visa. Okay, one more question that's come up here. I had a B1, B2 visa rejected in 2015. Will this negatively impact my F1 visa interview? Now, each visa interview that we do is separate, and it's going to be evaluated individually at the window by the consular officer. I do not think that a rejection on a B1, B2 will be a very serious negative impact on your application, as long as you are sufficiently prepared for your education and you have a credible financial plan. Okay, another question about B1, B2s. If you get an F1 visa, will your B1, B2 be canceled? No, in fact, your B1, B2 will remain in your passport. You will be able to retain, you can have multiple visas for different purposes of travel. So if you have a B1, B2 and you apply for an F1, you can retain both visas in your passport. However, when you get to the border, you will want to make sure that you explain to the officer that you're coming either as a student or as a tourist, because depending on that, how they admit you will determine your status for your stay in the United States. Another question here about for those people with medical problems, how will that affect their getting a student visa? In fact, medical issues are not part of the process that we use to evaluate student visas. So you will not be asked any medical questions or anything about your medical history during the student visa process. Another question here, which is very good to be aware of. Can a student visa go into administrative processing? In fact, in rare cases, this can happen, but should this happen, we do try to expedite the administrative processing in those cases to allow them to be issued before the student begins his or her program of study. Administrative processing will affect a very small minority of applicants who apply for visas. Another question here, is it mandatory to take the GRE for the visa? No. However, it may be mandatory for the college program that you're planning to enter. So you'll want to make sure that you go through that with your university or college that you're planning to attend. As far as the visa process, everything still, I go back to the slide that's up right now. Are you sufficiently prepared and do you have a credible financial plan? If you have a credible plan and you've been admitted to a university, then all you need to do with the visa officer is to demonstrate that you plan to use your visa appropriately. Okay, I see this question again. Can I change the university I will be attending if I receive an admin after my visa is approved? Well, this is slightly different than the previous question. In fact, you can. What you need on the student visa is when you go to the border, you will need a valid student visa and a current I-20 from a university. So if you choose to attend a different university from the one that you received your visa on, that is possible. You can do that. However, you should be prepared for extra scrutiny at the border, basically to explain why you've changed programs and why you've made the decision that you did. Many people choose to get a new visa that reflects the new school the actual school that they plan to attend, but this is not a legal requirement. So another question here, if you received a student visa a few years ago and you did not attend the university and now you would like to go back and study either at this university or another university. In fact, that is a possibility. We certainly understand that people sometimes change their mind or have changing circumstances in their lives that would, keep them from studying at the university they had planned to at a certain time. I think in this case, you should definitely be ready to explain to the consular officer the reasons for your decision. Why 2 years ago when you got your student visa you chose not to attend, and why this time you feel like it's the right time in your life to attend. So certainly there are many applicants who are able to explain these to the consular officers and obtain their visas. Okay, another question here. My brother is currently working in the United States. If I apply for an F1, will this make me look like I'm an intending immigrant? So your brother and you are two completely different people. And if you are both following immigration laws correctly, I don't see any reason why your brother's situation should reflect negatively on you. In this situation, I would just recommend that you go to the consular officer with your current plan to finance your education and show that you and your brother are not doing anything that's outside of the ordinary with U.S. immigration. So another question, I've finished my master's and I'd like to pursue a PhD now. Should I update my visa? Well, really the question is, do you need to update your visa? The only reason you would need to update your visa is because your visa has expired and you've left the United States. In fact, if you remain in the United States after your master's program and you subsequently decide to start a PhD program, you will just have to work with the International Student Office at both universities to confirm your enrollment is continuing at a different university. However, once your student visa has expired, you will need, while you're outside of the United States, you will need to obtain a new visa in order to present yourself at the port of entry. Here's another question. What if your Indian passport is expiring soon? Will that affect your ability to go to the United States on your student visa? And can you renew your passport in the United States? So the United States will recognize, as long as your visa is valid and it's in a passport that was valid when it was issued, we will continue to accept that visa for entrance to the United States. Of course, if your Indian passport, has expired, you will need to get it updated. So if that is the case, you will have to present yourself to the border with both a valid Indian passport and your expired passport with the valid visa in it. So those two documents will be necessary if that happens to be the case. So here's a great general question. Do we base our student visa decisions on the university that the student is planning to attend or on the individual student and how they present themselves in the interview? So what the consular officer is primarily looking at is your performance at the interview. Do you present yourself as a credible student with a plan to pay for his or her education and continue their studies appropriate in the United States or not? The school that you choose is not going to be the primary factor in the consular officer's decision. Okay, another question here. Basically, how many universities should we apply to? Do we need to apply to more than 2 to 3 universities? That really is going to depend on you as a student and the program that you're looking for. I think the main thing that you should look for is a program that fits your needs at the time, your professional needs and your personal needs as you move forward in your life. So if you know that there's just one program out there that's really the perfect program for you and you've researched it and you're certain, then go ahead and apply to just that one program. However, I think it's very common advice for you to apply to several different programs to make sure that you're accepted at a program that can work for you and help you professionally. So here, another question here. Is it difficult for a bachelor's student to be accepted directly into a PhD program? So unfortunately, that's going to depend primarily on the university and the type of program. It's not really going to be a visa issue. But I think depending on the program and depending on your preparation, as long as you're adequately prepared for a PhD program, you'll be very competitive to start a PhD program immediately after your bachelor's degree. So here's another question. If my father is working outside of India in another country, will that negatively impact my visa application process? In fact, no. I don't think any of your family situation, even if your family members were living in the United States and working there, the main things that you need to demonstrate are your credible plans and your ability to pay for your education. Now, there will be a question of ties. What are your ties back to India that would compel you to return when your student program is finished? But for the most part, this should be handled during your interview when you explain how your educational program will forward your professional development. So a common question I'm seeing is about the finances that you're required to present to the consular officer during the interview. So there are no set documents that the officer is going to require for the interview, and there's no set amount that's required to show in, for example, a bank statement or a loan document to answer the question of how much money, how much finances do you have available to pay for your education. But what we're looking for is overall, to answer the question of does this student have a credible plan to pay for their education, and whether that's a loan or whether that's support from family or whether that's personal savings is not the primary issue for the consular officer. The idea is, does this student have a plan to pay for these, to afford these costs? Okay, here's a great question. Are we allowed to travel anywhere in the United States during our vacation? Your visa to the United States allows you to go anywhere you'd like in the United States. Of course, you'll still have to maintain your status as a student, but during the holidays, you can travel wherever you like within the United States. So another question here, I have plenty of work experience after college. Will that impact my chances of having a visa approved? I think work experience is actually a great indicator of where a student is going with their professional development, and it can provide a lot of great stories for why you've chosen to pursue the field that you've chosen to pursue. And therefore, if you have work experience, I would just absolutely mention that up front and say, look, I've been working in a field. I'm interested in updating my qualifications or pursuing an advancement in my professional situation. That's why I'm pursuing my master's degree. I think that's a great opportunity for you. So another question here that was part of the presentation, how long does it take to process the F1 visa? Generally, processing times for the visa from the interview to receiving the visa are 3 to 5 business days. So we'll retain your passport after the interview and we'll return it to you within 3 to 5 days. So someone asked, what are the red flags that consular officers look for that will lead to a student's visa application getting rejected? So like I said, we want to bear in mind that this is an interview-based process. So the main thing that we're evaluating is your ability at the interview to demonstrate that you're sufficiently prepared for your education and that you have your credible financial plan, as well as that you plan to use your visa appropriately. So if you are not able to meet any of those particular qualifications, that will make it more difficult for you to obtain a student visa. So another question here, do consular officers ever ask technical questions about the field of study of the candidate? So in my experience, this is not the case. What we're looking for is whether or not you are a credible student who's prepared for your program. This is not supposed to be a quiz or a test on your particular field of interest. So here's another question we often get when we talk to Indian students. What if I've taken a gap year after my bachelor's degree? How will that affect my visa? As long as your gap is not it's very difficult for you to explain what you've been doing during your gap year or how you've been preparing for your education. I don't think that having a 1 or 2 year gap will make much of an impact on your student visa application. But again, you will need to meet the standard. You will need to meet the standard of explaining that you have the preparation for the degree that you're seeking and that you're ready to embark on this program. So here's another question. Can I tell the visa officer that I plan to take advantage of the OPT opportunity after I graduate? Will that necessarily make me look like an intending immigrant? In fact, the OPT, or optional practical training, is an integral part of many programs in the United States for study. And you should be willing, though, you should be able and willing to explain to the consular officer how you may participate in OPT and subsequently use that experience to obtain the next job in your field back here in India. So if you're able to credibly explain that, I don't see why there's anything wrong with it, with acknowledging that you are interested in pursuing OPT after your degree. Here's a great question. So I studied in the United States, or I went to the United States on a J1 2 years ago, and I received the 2-year bar. How will that impact my possibility of getting an F1 visa? So in fact, the J1 2-year residency requirement only affects immigrant visas as well as Ls, I believe. So F1s are not impacted by former participation in the J1 program. I'm sorry, H's and L's, H visas and L visas. So you will have to return to your home country for at least 2 years before you apply for an H, an L, or any type of immigrant visa. So another question here, this is a very general question, but I think it's very good to remind ourselves of. What is Section 214B? So 214B is the requirement that visa officers have when they evaluate visa applicants. They must assume when the interview starts that the applicant is an intending immigrant to the United States. During the interview process, it is the goal of the applicant to convince the officer that he or she is not, in fact, an intending immigrant. So we have to presume when we speak with you that you are an immigrant and allow you to tell us why you are not. So good examples of why you would not be an intending immigrant would be establishing your strong ties to your country of origin, either through family, through job, or just through your ties to your country that you're building now as a young student. I think this should all be part of your visa interview process, to think about, how does this education actually allow me to later build my career and build my life here in India. So someone is asking, what's the minimum amount of time you should leave between visa applications if you are rejected for your F1? In fact, there's no minimum amount of time that you need to wait before you reapply. However, you should be aware that at each subsequent interview, you will need to demonstrate some new or different aspect of your application, or highlight some different aspect of your application that will allow the officer to basically to approve your visa. So if you're just going to tell the same exact story again, you haven't at all bolstered your qualifications, or you haven't changed anything about your process, it will be very difficult for you to obtain a visa on a subsequent interview. So another question here, what is necessary to travel back home for the holidays with the F1? Well, every time you travel back, when you return to the United States, you will need to make sure that you have both a valid F1 visa and a current I-20. So you may want to check in with your university's Office of International Students before you travel, just to make sure that your I-20 is up to date. But other than that, you'll just need both of those forms at the port of entry at the United States. Here's another question. Does the port of entry in the United States need to be close to the university I'll attend, or can I enter from anywhere? So you are allowed, with an F1 visa, you are allowed to enter the United States at any port of entry. Of course, you may need to show the CBP officer at the border how you intend to get from the port of entry to your university. If you are, for example, studying in San Antonio and you're entering in New York and you don't have an onward flight, that would obviously be something that would raise a red flag about your entry into the United States. But if you arrived in New York and you had an onward flight to San Antonio, that would make perfect sense. So one question here, can I get an F1 just on the basis of my GRE scores? No, in fact, the F1, it's a requirement that you also have an I-20, an admission from a certified university in the United States before you can apply for an F1 visa. Okay, another question here about finances. Is it mandatory to show financial support equivalent to twice the I-20 amount? So during your visa interview, you will need to show that you have finances to pay for at least the first year of your education in the United States. For any subsequent years, the second year for a master's program or the second through fourth year in a bachelor's program, you will need to show that you have a plan in place to obtain the funds. So we do not require that you have a bank account with all the money in it at one time, but you will need to explain how you are going to be able to make these payments. So OPT and CPT question. Do we apply separately for OPT and CPT, or is it included with the F1 visa? So OPT and CPT are handled in the United States by DHS. And you'll primarily be applying for them and changing your status for them by applying through the Student Center, International Student Center at your university. So usually when you graduate from your program, before you graduate, you will speak to your university and tell them that you are looking for OPT in your field. They'll be able to update your I-20 to reflect that, and then you'll be able to basically look for jobs on the basis of that once you have an employment authorization. So someone asks, is my F1 visa valid for 120 days or 150 days for my first entry into the United States? So your F1 is going to be valid you will need to enter before your start date on your I-20. Once you've entered, however, then it will be up to you and your university to make sure that you certify that you have arrived at the university and started your course load as you've planned. So there's no validity problem. You just need to enter before your program start date. Okay, another great question. What if I'm studying a master's degree and the reason I'm doing it is to later pursue a PhD? How will a visa officer view it? So I think a PhD is a great opportunity a master's degree is a great opportunity to develop your field of expertise for pursuing a PhD. Keep in mind that during the visa interview, the officer is going to want to see that you basically are qualified for the field that you're going into and that you're prepared for the level of education that you're seeking. Now, if you are in the future thinking of pursuing a PhD, you might want to mention that to the visa officer. It's not required, however. But you will want to explain how your current master's degree will help you in your future academic and professional career. Okay, here's another question about finances. I have a relative in the United States with a green card who is planning to take an education loan for me from a United States bank. Is there any reason that this would affect my ties or the visa officer's views of my ties with my home country? I don't see any reason why this would. However, you will need to explain how this financial plan came about and how you're planning to repay this loan in the future. If you have relatives in the United States who have green cards and are willing to sponsor you, I think that's a good sign that you're a serious student and your family is ready to support you in your educational endeavors. But I don't think it will necessarily negatively impact anyone's view of your possible ties to your home country. But you will want to just make sure that you consider the possibility and consider how you're planning to use your degree in the future, how exactly that will help you in returning to your home country and pursuing your professional development here in India. So another question here, should we book a flight before we apply for the visa? In fact, I think we recommend the opposite. Wait until you have your visa in hand before you book any flights to the United States. Okay, here's a question. I'm currently in my third year of an engineering degree and I'll complete my fourth year next year. Can I attend the interview with just 6 semesters of college marks? In fact, there's no requirement that you show us your college marks. We don't regularly look at transcripts, but you will want to show that you're prepared for your next degree. So if you don't have your bachelor's degree already finished and you're planning to apply for a master's, you'll need to demonstrate that you have a plan to complete your bachelor's degree before your master's begins. So another question here, how can we check whether a university is certified or not? All universities that are able to issue I-20s are considered certified by the US Department of Homeland Security. So you'll want to talk to the university and make sure that they are able to issue an I-20 before you apply to that school. So another question here, I've been admitted to 4 universities, but I haven't yet received an I-20. Can I apply before I receive my I-20? No, in fact, you'll have to wait until you receive your I-20 before you can apply for the F1 student visa. So here's a great question. Do we have to have money in our bank account even if we have secured a loan in order to pay for our education expenses? So the main thing is we're not going to be looking for a bank account that has the amount of money in it. What we're going to be looking for is a credible financial plan, and you will show that to us in person, orally at the interview. We don't normally review financial documents. What we're reviewing is the ability of the student to answer questions about their financial plan credibly. So here's a great question that comes up all the time, which is what are some ways that we demonstrate our ties to our home country? In fact, the best way, in my opinion, that you can demonstrate ties to your home country is by showing how this education fits into your future career plans and your professional development. So obviously, we're not expecting that 22-year-old master's degree students own land or or that every student have a job waiting for them as soon as they finish their master's degree. What we're looking for is that the student is credibly able to explain how this master's degree will fit into their career later in India. Another question that we see all the time: what if my family members are U.S. citizens living in the United States? Will that cause my visa officer to think of me as a intending immigrant? It's really a question of, we're trying to evaluate the entire student and their relationship both to the United States and their university. So if you're a credibly prepared student with a good financial plan and a plan to use your visa appropriately, I don't think it should be a problem that you have an uncle or any other family member who lives in the United States. If on the other hand you have family members who are routinely violating U.S. immigration laws, that could be a problem when you try to obtain an F1. But if your family members are U.S. citizens living and working in the United States, that should not be any sort of red flag. Another question related to OPT. May I tell the visa officer that I would like to do an OPT job in the United States, assuming I get one after I complete my master's? So OPT, like I said before, is considered part of the academic program. You'll be able to do it on your F1 that you receive. It's not a red flag of any kind for the visa officer. As long as you're planning to do it in your field and you're able to demonstrate that it contributes to your professional development, that would not be a red flag that would cause your visa to be rejected. So another question: I've heard that we need at least 3 admits to receive a visa. Is that true? No, there's no minimum number of admissions that you need from universities in order to obtain the F1 visa. What you want to demonstrate, sometimes consular officers will ask, what other schools were you accepted to? What other schools did you apply to? And the reason that we're asking that is we're trying to find out, what was your process when you selected your university? What sort of programs were you looking for? What kind of universities, either the different regions that you were hoping to live in or the different types of programs you were interested in? We're trying to assess your credibility as a student. So most students do not apply to just one school, but if that's the only school that works for you, or that's the only program in the United States that meets your requirements, and you've managed to get an admit, and you're able to explain to the visa officer, look, this is why I chose this school. I looked at every school under the sun, but this was the one school that could help me in my career or my research. Then that's a credible explanation of how you chose that school. So I see a question here. In 2002, my parents overstayed their visa. I was 6 years old at the time. Now I'm grown and I'd like to pursue a master's degree in the United States. Will this at all affect my chances? So I would say that in general, we're not going to hold anything against you that happened when you were a young child. Your parents' decisions are not the same as your decisions, but you should be aware that the consular officer will have access to your prior immigration records and may ask questions about your previous stays in the United States, especially related to overstaying or violating the terms of your visa. So I would definitely be prepared to answer questions about that overstay at my visa interview. But no, it's not necessarily something that will disqualify you from receiving a visa at this time. I see a question here. I received a B1, B2 earlier this year. Will this affect my F1 student visa? No, in fact, the fact that you interviewed previously will have little to no impact on your student visa process. You'll still need to obtain the I-20 and go through the whole process again, but it will not negatively impact you that, for example, you've studied you visited the United States or been on a trip in the United States before. If we have a gap in our career that was for a medical purpose, do we need to bring in documents to show that? No, we don't regularly review any kind of documents besides the I-20 at the window. I can't think of a situation where we would need to review medical documents for a student visa. So I see another question here about renewing Indian passports. Unfortunately, I'm not able to advise on how to renew Indian passports. That's something that you'll have to work with the Indian government on. I know they have consulates in the United States and an embassy in the United States that can help you with renewing your passports while you're there. Okay, I see another question here about where to enter the United States. I plan to fly to Dallas via Chicago. I have a short layover in Chicago. Should I clear CBP in Dallas instead of Chicago? You will have to clear CBP in the first airport where you enter the United States. So if your flight goes to the first place you enter the United States is Chicago, that's where you will have to go through CBP. So I would definitely recommend that you leave plenty of time to lay over in the United States if you're arriving somewhere other than your final destination. Another question, I was born in another country, however, I'm an Indian citizen. Will that make a difference in processing my visa application? In fact, no. If you're an Indian citizen, you should be interviewed in the same process as any other Indian citizen. And another question here, can we enter the U.S. before the start of our program if we obtain a B1, B2 visa? Yes, if you have a valid B1, B2 visa, and you would like to go before the start of your program, you are able to do that. However, when you come back on your F1, you may choose to leave the United States and then come back specifically on your F1 to make sure that you're in the correct status. Okay, this is another question I've seen a few times. I'm sorry I haven't gotten to it earlier. Do I have to apply from the nearest consulate to where I live, or can I apply from any consulate in India? In fact, you can apply from any embassy or consulate in the world. However, it's helpful when you apply in India because the officers working here in India have a bit more familiarity with Indian universities and the Indian culture. They may be better able to assess your application for a student visa. The same is probably true within India. Officers in Mumbai see far more applicants from Mumbai. Officers in Chennai or Hyderabad see applicants from those regions. It may actually be beneficial to you to apply in the consulate or embassy that's closest to you because the officers will have more familiarity with the local conditions. All right, so that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you for joining us. It was great to speak to you, so many of you, and see all the interest that we have here in studying in the United States.